The resignation letter was sitting on my desk when I walked into my corner office that Tuesday morning, the envelope crisp and white against the dark mahogany surface. Amanda Chen had been my executive assistant for 2.5 years, the backbone of Martinez Creative Agency, the woman who knew my schedule better than I did and could anticipate my needs before I even voiced them. But as I read her carefully typed words, my hands began to shake with something that went far beyond the shock of losing a trusted employee. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dear Jessica, I can no longer continue working for you in good conscience. What I've discovered about Ryan's activities, through your shared accounts and business connections, has made my position here untenable. I strongly advise you to examine the joint financial documents in your home safe, particularly the ones dated from the past 6 months. I'm sorry I cannot explain more, but my own safety depends on leaving immediately. Please be careful who you trust. Amanda. My coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, sending hot liquid cascading across the resignation letter and pooling on my desk. The woman who had organized my life, managed my most confidential business deals, and had access to every aspect of my professional and personal finances, had just warned me about my own husband while fleeing like a criminal in the night. The morning Austin sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown office, casting long shadows across the space I had worked so hard to build. Martinez Creative Agency occupied the entire 15th floor of one of Austin's most prestigious business towers, a testament to the company I had grown from a one-woman operation in my garage to a full-service marketing firm employing 25 talented professionals. The walls were lined with awards and recognition plaques, evidence of campaigns that had launched successful brands and revitalized struggling businesses across Texas. I had always prided myself on being intuitive about people, on my ability to read between the lines and anticipate problems before they became crises. It was a skill that had served me well in business, helping me navigate complex client relationships and build a team of dedicated employees who had stayed with the company for years. But as I sat staring at Amanda's resignation letter, I realized that my confidence in my own judgment had been catastrophically misplaced. Amanda had been more than just an assistant. She had been my right hand, the person who managed my calendar, screened my calls, and handled the intricate details of running a growing business. When I traveled to meet with clients in Dallas or Houston, Amanda ensured that everything at the office ran smoothly in my absence. She had access to my business accounts, my personal schedule, and even my home address and security codes for deliveries. More importantly, she had become someone I trusted implicitly, someone I had welcomed into the inner circle of my professional and personal life. The irony was not lost on me that I, a woman who built her career on understanding human psychology and predicting market behavior, had been completely blind to whatever was happening under my own nose. My agency specialized in crisis management and brand recovery, helping companies navigate scandals and rebuild their reputations after public disasters. I had counseled CEOs through embezzlement scandals, guided politicians through personal controversies, and helped family businesses recover from internal betrayals. Yet here I was, apparently the victim of something so serious that my own assistant had felt compelled to warn me and then disappear. The resignation letter raised more questions than it answered. What had Amanda discovered about Ryan? How had she gained access to information about our personal finances? And most disturbing of all, why had she felt the need to flee, rather than simply resign professionally with 2 weeks' notice, like any normal employee? Ryan Martinez had entered my life 3 years ago at a charity gala for children's literacy, an event my agency had helped organize for one of our nonprofit clients. He was charming, successful, and seemingly perfect for a single mother trying to balance a demanding career with raising a teenage daughter. Ryan worked in luxury real estate development, specializing in high-end residential projects throughout Central Texas. He was well-connected in Austin's business community, financially stable, and most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about both Emma and me. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic dinners, weekend getaways to his lake house in Galveston, and thoughtful gestures that made me believe I had finally found someone who understood the demands of my career while supporting my ambitions. Ryan had been patient with Emma's initial resistance to having a stepfather, winning her over with his knowledge of contemporary music, and his willingness to drive her to volleyball practice when my schedule became overwhelming. When we married 18 months ago in an intimate ceremony overlooking Lake Austin, I thought I had achieved the perfect balance of professional success and personal happiness. Ryan moved into the Lakeway home I had purchased when the agency first became profitable, blending his life seamlessly with the rhythm Emma and I had established over the years. He contributed to the household expenses, helped with Emma's college planning, and seemed genuinely invested in our family's future. But Amanda's letter suggested that the man I had married, the man who shared my bed and my life, was involved in something serious enough to make a trusted employee abandon her career and flee without explanation. The reference to joint financial documents in our home safe was particularly troubling, because I distinctly remembered Ryan suggesting we establish joint accounts shortly after our marriage. At the time, it had seemed like a natural step for a couple planning a future together. Now, I wondered what Amanda had discovered in those financial records that had frightened her so badly. The morning passed in a blur of canceled meetings and rescheduled appointments as I struggled to process what Amanda's departure might mean for both my business and my personal life. Lisa Rodriguez, my business partner and closest friend, had handled the immediate crisis of reassigning Amanda's responsibilities to other team members, but I could see the concern in her eyes every time she looked at me. Lisa had never completely trusted Ryan, though she had been diplomatic enough to keep her reservations to herself. Now I wondered if her instincts had been more accurate than my own. By noon, I had made the decision to leave the office early and drive home to examine the documents Amanda had referenced in her letter. The safe was located in Ryan's home office, a room he had claimed shortly after moving in and had gradually filled with his real estate files, investment documents, and business correspondence. I had respected his need for a private workspace, just as he had respected my need to maintain a home office for agency business that required after-hours attention. The drive from downtown Austin to our Lakeway neighborhood normally took 45 minutes, but heavy traffic on Mopac gave me additional time to think about Amanda's behavior over the past few weeks. In retrospect, I could identify subtle changes in her demeanor that I had attributed to stress from our recent expansion into the San Antonio market. She had seemed distracted during meetings, had asked unusual questions about my personal schedule, and had volunteered to handle financial reconciliations that typically fell outside her job description. Most significantly, Amanda had recently begun staying late at the office, claiming she needed quiet time to organize files and update our client database. I had appreciated her dedication, even giving her a substantial bonus for her extra efforts. Now, I realized that her after-hours access to the office had provided her with opportunities to examine documents and information that went far beyond her normal responsibilities. Our Lakeway home sat on 2 acres of landscaped grounds with a view of the lake that had initially attracted me to the property. The house itself was a modern interpretation of traditional Texas architecture, with clean lines and expansive windows that maximized the natural light and scenic views. It was a home that reflected my success, a place where I could entertain clients when necessary, while providing Emma with the stability and security I had always wanted for her. Ryan's car was not in the driveway, which was not unusual, since his real estate work often required site visits and client meetings throughout the day. Emma was at school and would not return until after volleyball practice, giving me several hours to examine whatever Amanda had discovered in our financial documents. The house felt different as I walked through the front door, as if Amanda's warning had somehow changed the fundamental nature of the space I had considered my sanctuary. Ryan's office was located at the back of the house, a spacious room with built-in shelving and a view of our swimming pool and the lake beyond. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the Austin skyline, a wedding gift from one of Ryan's colleagues that I had never particularly liked but had accepted graciously. Ryan had given me the combination shortly after we married, explaining that it contained important documents for both of us, and that I should have access in case of an emergency. As I opened the safe, I felt like I was crossing a line that would fundamentally change my understanding of my own life. The neat stacks of documents inside were organized with a precision that was characteristic of Ryan's methodical approach to business. But as I began examining the papers, I realized that Amanda's warning had been understated. What I discovered was not simply concerning, it was devastating. The first document that caught my attention was a bank statement for an account I had never seen before. Despite the fact that my name was listed as a joint account holder, The account showed regular deposits that corresponded exactly with payments from my agency's major clients, but the money was being transferred out as quickly as it arrived. Thousands of dollars that should have been part of my business revenue were being systematically diverted to accounts I had never authorized or even knew existed. As I continued examining the documents, a pattern began to emerge that made my stomach clench with growing dread. Ryan had somehow gained access to my business banking information and had been intercepting payments from clients, depositing them into joint accounts he had established without my knowledge, then transferring the money to what appeared to be offshore investment accounts. The scope of the financial manipulation was staggering, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 18 months. But the financial fraud was only the beginning. Deeper in the safe, I found correspondence between Ryan and several individuals whose names I did not recognize, discussing what appeared to be a systematic plan to drain my business assets and personal savings. The emails referenced my travel schedule, my relationships with key clients, and even personal information about Emma's college plans and my mother's health issues in San Diego. One email thread was particularly chilling because it discussed me as if I were a business acquisition rather than a human being. Ryan had provided detailed information about my agency's client base, my personal net worth, and my emotional vulnerabilities to people who were clearly planning to exploit that information. The correspondence revealed that my marriage had been part of an elaborate long-term scheme to gain access to my financial resources and business connections. The most disturbing discovery was a series of documents that suggested Ryan's real estate career was largely fictional. The luxury development projects he claimed to be working on either did not exist or were being used as fronts for money laundering operations. The professional credentials he had shared with me, the business relationships he had described, and even some of the colleagues I had met at social events were apparently part of an elaborate deception designed to establish his credibility and gain my trust. As the afternoon wore on and I continued reading through the documents, I began to understand the true scope of what Amanda had discovered. Ryan was not simply stealing money from my business. He was part of a sophisticated fraud operation that targeted successful professional women, particularly those who owned businesses or had access to substantial financial resources. The emails revealed that I was not his first victim, and that the group he worked with had successfully destroyed other women's careers and personal lives before moving on to new targets. The realization that my marriage was built on lies, that the man I had trusted with my daughter's well-being and my business's future was actually a professional criminal, hit me with a force that left me physically nauseated. I had prided myself on my intelligence, my business acumen, and my ability to judge character. Yet I had been completely deceived by someone who had studied my weaknesses and exploited them with calculating precision. But as I sat in Ryan's office, surrounded by preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Evidence of his betrayal, I felt something unexpected rising alongside my shock and hurt. Amanda had not simply abandoned me, she had given me a weapon. By documenting Ryan's activities and preserving the evidence, she had provided me with the tools I needed to fight back. The question was no longer whether I had been victimized, but what I was going to do about it. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted my thoughts, and I quickly returned the documents to the safe, my heart pounding as I realized that Ryan was returning home earlier than expected. I moved to the window and saw him getting out of his BMW, talking animatedly on his phone with someone, his body language relaxed and confident. He had no idea that his carefully constructed deception had been exposed, or that the wife he had been systematically betraying was now armed with the knowledge she needed to destroy him. As I watched Ryan approach the house, still engaged in his phone conversation, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to confront him immediately, not going to reveal what I had discovered, until I had a plan that would ensure he faced consequences for what he had done. Amanda had taken a tremendous risk to warn me, and I was not going to waste the advantage her courage had provided. Ryan entered the house calling my name, his voice warm and affectionate, playing the role of the loving husband with the same skill he had demonstrated throughout our marriage. But now I could hear the performance in his tone, could recognize the calculated nature of his charm. When he found me in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if it were any other evening, I forced myself to smile and ask about his day, all while planning his complete destruction. The man who had stolen my money, betrayed my trust, and put my daughter at risk, was about to discover that he had underestimated the woman he had chosen as his victim. Amanda's resignation letter had not just exposed Ryan's crimes, it had unleashed something in me that I had not known existed. I was going to make sure that Ryan and his associates paid for every lie they had told, every dollar they had stolen, and every moment of trust they had violated. As I served dinner and listened to Ryan tell fabricated stories about his day, I began planning a campaign that would rival any crisis management strategy I had ever developed for a client. The difference was that this time, I was not trying to save a reputation. I was going to systematically destroy the people who had tried to destroy me. The next morning, I arrived at the office 2 hours early, using my keycard to access the building while the downtown Austin streets were still quiet, and the cleaning crews were finishing their rounds. The Martinez Creative Agency offices felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, transformed from the bustling workplace I knew into something that resembled a crime scene waiting to be processed. Amanda's desk sat empty, her computer monitor dark, but I knew that somewhere in her files and digital footprints lay the evidence I needed to understand exactly how deep Ryan's betrayal ran. I had spent the previous evening playing the perfect wife, listening to Ryan's fabricated stories about his real estate deals while internally cataloging every lie that fell from his lips. When he had kissed me goodnight and pulled me close in bed, I had forced myself not to recoil from his touch, knowing that maintaining the facade of normalcy was crucial to whatever plan I was going to develop. But lying awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing and knowing what I now knew about his true nature, had been one of the longest nights of my life. Now, sitting in Amanda's chair with her computer password that I had discovered in the emergency contact list she had maintained, I began the systematic process of uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy that had been operating under my nose. Amanda's email account revealed a digital trail that painted a picture far more complex and disturbing than even the documents in Ryan's safe had suggested. She had been documenting everything, creating a comprehensive record of financial irregularities, suspicious phone calls, and unusual requests that Ryan had made regarding my business operations. The earliest emails in her investigation folder dated back almost 6 months, suggesting that Amanda had been aware of suspicious activity long before she had decided to warn me and flee. Her meticulous documentation revealed a woman who had been torn between her loyalty to me as her employer and her growing awareness that something criminal was taking place. She had screenshot banking discrepancies, recorded dates and times of suspicious phone conversations, and even taken photographs of documents that Ryan had asked her to process through the agency's financial systems. One email thread that made my blood run cold involved correspondence between Amanda and someone named Marcus Webb, who appeared to be some kind of private investigator or security consultant. Amanda had reached out to him after discovering that Ryan had been accessing my computer remotely, using sophisticated software to monitor my business communications and copy sensitive client information. Marcus had confirmed Amanda's suspicions that my entire digital life was being surveilled, and had provided her with instructions on how to document the intrusion without alerting Ryan to her knowledge. The technological aspect of Ryan's operation was particularly sophisticated and disturbing. According to Marcus's analysis, Ryan had installed keylogger software on both my office and home computers, allowing him to capture every password, every email, and every business communication I had sent or received over the past year. This explained how he had gained access to my business banking information and how he had been able to time his financial manipulations to coincide with major client payments and business developments. But the digital surveillance was only part of a much larger operation. Amanda's notes revealed that Ryan had been systematically cultivating relationships with my key employees, particularly those who handled financial matters or had access to client information. He had taken several of my staff members out for drinks, ostensibly as a friendly gesture from the boss's husband, but Amanda had observed him asking detailed questions about agency operations, client relationships, and my personal business practices. Most disturbing of all, Amanda had discovered that Ryan had been meeting regularly with Dr. James Wilson, the family therapist that he had suggested we see for some minor issues Emma had been having adjusting to our blended family. According to Amanda's investigation, Dr. Wilson was not a licensed therapist at all, but rather a psychological manipulation specialist who worked with Ryan's criminal organization to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities in their targets. The therapy sessions I had thought were helping our family were actually intelligence-gathering operations, designed to provide Ryan with deeper insights into my psychological makeup and decision-making processes. As I continued reading through Amanda's files, I began to understand the true scope of the organization that had targeted me. This was not a simple case of financial fraud, but rather a sophisticated criminal enterprise that specialized in what appeared to be long-term infiltration and systematic destruction of successful professional women. The emails referenced previous operations in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, each following a similar pattern of romantic manipulation, financial exploitation, and ultimately complete destruction of the victim's business and personal life. The realization that I was not Ryan's first victim was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Terrifying because it revealed the professional nature of the deception I had fallen for, but comforting because it suggested that there might be other women who had experienced similar betrayals, and who might be willing to help me fight back. Amanda's files included references to at least 3 other women who had been targeted by Ryan's organization, though the outcomes of their cases were not detailed in the documents I could access. One name that appeared repeatedly in Amanda's investigation was Victoria Nash, a successful attorney in Houston, who had apparently been targeted by the same organization 2 years earlier. According to Amanda's notes, Victoria had lost her law practice, her personal savings, and her reputation after discovering that her husband was part of a criminal conspiracy. But unlike other victims, Victoria had not simply accepted her destruction quietly. She had been fighting back, building a case against the organization and trying to connect with other victims who could provide testimony and evidence. The more I read, the more I realized that Amanda's decision to warn me and flee had been motivated by more than just professional ethics or personal loyalty. She had been recruited by Victoria Nash and others who were working to build a comprehensive case against Ryan's organization. Amanda's role as my assistant had provided her with a unique opportunity to gather intelligence from inside the operation, and her sudden departure was part of a larger strategy to protect evidence and witnesses while building a case that could bring down the entire network. This revelation changed everything about how I understood Amanda's actions and about what my own response should be. I was not simply the victim of an individual criminal who happened to be my husband, but rather a target in a much larger conspiracy that had already destroyed multiple lives and businesses. The stakes were higher than I had initially realized, but so were the potential resources available to fight back. I spent the next several hours copying Amanda's files to encrypted drives and secure cloud storage, ensuring that the evidence she had gathered would not be lost if Ryan or his associates discovered what I had learned. The documentation was extensive enough to fill several federal prosecution files, but I also understood that gathering evidence and successfully prosecuting the case would require much more sophisticated legal and investigative support than I could provide alone. As the rest of my staff began arriving for the normal business day, I forced myself to transition back into my role as the successful agency owner who was dealing with nothing more serious than an assistant's unexpected resignation. Lisa Rodriguez arrived early, as she always did, and I could see the concern in her eyes as she assessed my demeanor. Lisa had been my business partner since the agency's early days, and she knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating under significant stress. We had hired Lisa fresh out of the University of Texas advertising program 7 years ago, and she had grown with the company from a junior account coordinator to my full partner and the agency's creative director. Her instincts about people and her ability to read between the lines in client relationships had been invaluable to our success. More importantly, Lisa was one of the few people in my life who had never been completely convinced by Ryan's charm, though she had been diplomatic enough to keep her reservations to herself. When Lisa knocked on my office door mid-morning with coffee and the concerned expression I had been expecting, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I was going to tell her everything. If Amanda's investigation was accurate, and if Ryan's organization was as sophisticated and dangerous as the evidence suggested, I was going to need allies who I could trust completely. Lisa's loyalty to me and to the agency was unquestionable, and her analytical mind would be invaluable in developing a strategy to protect our business and build a case against Ryan. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my professional life. Watching Lisa's expression change from concern to shock to anger as I explained what Amanda had discovered was like watching someone's worldview crumble in real time. Lisa had known Ryan for 3 years, had attended our wedding, and had welcomed him into our extended business family. Learning that he was a professional criminal who had been systematically stealing from the agency and surveilling our operations was devastating for her as well. But Lisa's response also revealed the steel core that had made her such an effective business partner. After the initial shock wore off, she immediately began asking the right questions about evidence preservation, legal strategy, and business protection. Her first concern was ensuring that Ryan could not access any additional agency resources or client information, which led to an immediate and comprehensive audit of our financial systems and digital security. Working with our IT consultant, Lisa and I spent the afternoon implementing what appeared to be routine security updates, while actually cutting off all of Ryan's access to agency systems and information. We changed passwords, revoked access credentials, and installed monitoring software that would alert us if anyone attempted to access our systems using Ryan's previous entry points. To any outside observer, it would appear that we were simply implementing enhanced cybersecurity measures in response to recent industry threats. The financial audit was more complex and more disturbing. Lisa's examination of our accounts confirmed Amanda's findings that substantial sums had been diverted from client payments over the past 18 months. The theft had been sophisticated enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts in our accounting software, but systematic enough to represent a significant drain on the agency's resources. Thousands of dollars that should have been reinvested in staff development, equipment upgrades, and business expansion had instead been funneled into Ryan's offshore accounts. More troubling was Lisa's discovery that Ryan had been using his access to our client information to approach several of our major accounts with competing proposals through shell companies that appeared to be legitimate marketing firms. He had not simply been stealing money from existing contracts, but had been actively working to undermine our client relationships and redirect business to organizations he controlled. This explains several recent client departures that had puzzled me, as well as some unusual pricing pressures we had been experiencing in competitive bid situations. As the day progressed and the full scope of Ryan's infiltration became clear, Lisa and I began developing what we privately referred to as our defensive strategy. Our immediate priorities were protecting the agency's remaining assets, securing our client relationships, and ensuring that Ryan could not cause additional damage to our business operations. But we also understood that defensive measures alone would not be sufficient to address what Amanda's investigation had revealed. The evidence suggested that Ryan and his organization would not simply disappear once they realized their operation had been discovered. According to Amanda's files, previous victims who had attempted to fight back had experienced escalating harassment, threats, and even physical intimidation. If we were going to expose Ryan's crimes and protect ourselves from retaliation, we were going to need professional help from law enforcement and legal experts who specialized in complex financial crimes and organized fraud operations. Lisa's research into the legal aspects of our situation revealed that the type of conspiracy Amanda had documented fell under federal jurisdiction, particularly given the interstate nature of the financial crimes and the use of technology to facilitate the fraud. This meant that we would need to work with FBI agents who specialized in white-collar crime rather than local law enforcement, who might not have the resources or expertise to handle such a complex case. The decision to contact federal authorities was not one we made lightly. Once we involved the FBI, we would lose control over the timeline and strategy of any investigation. Our business operations would likely be scrutinized as part of the criminal investigation, and there was always the possibility that the complexity of the case would result in a lengthy legal process that could damage our reputation and client relationships, even if we were ultimately vindicated. But the alternative to involving law enforcement was to allow Ryan and his organization to continue operating, potentially targeting other successful women for the same type of systematic destruction we had experienced. Amanda's investigation had revealed enough information about previous victims to suggest that the human cost of inaction would be substantial. Moreover, the sophistication of Ryan's operation suggested that he and his associates had resources and capabilities that would make them extremely dangerous adversaries if we attempted to handle the situation privately. As evening approached, and Lisa and I finished securing our immediate business interests, I faced the prospect of returning home to maintain my facade of ignorance, while knowing everything I now knew about Ryan's true nature. The thought of sitting across the dinner table from him, listening to his lies and pretending to believe his manipulations, was almost unbearable. But I also understood that revealing my knowledge prematurely could jeopardize not only my own safety, but also the broader investigation that Amanda and others had been building. The drive home through Austin's evening traffic gave me time to prepare mentally for the performance I would need to deliver. I practiced expressions of concern about Amanda's sudden departure, rehearsed questions about whether Ryan had noticed anything unusual about her behavior, and prepared myself to deflect any probing questions he might ask about my own activities and emotional state. The irony that I was using crisis management and public relations skills to manage my own personal crisis was not lost on me. Emma was already home when I arrived, having been dropped off by a teammate's parent after volleyball practice. At 16, she was beginning to develop the independence and critical thinking skills that would serve her well in college, but she was also still young enough to be vulnerable to manipulation by adults she trusted. The realization that Ryan had been living in our home, with access to Emma's personal information and daily routines, added another layer of urgency to my need to resolve this situation quickly and decisively. Over dinner, Ryan was particularly attentive and charming, asking detailed questions about my day and expressing concern about the challenges of replacing Amanda so suddenly. His performance was flawless, demonstrating the same combination of emotional intelligence and calculated manipulation that had initially attracted me to him. But now that I understood the professional nature of his deception, I could recognize the subtle ways he was probing for information about my emotional state and any suspicions I might have developed. When Ryan suggested that we might want to consider hiring a temporary staffing agency to help with the transition while I searched for a permanent replacement, I realized that he was already working to maintain his access to agency operations through whatever new assistant we might hire. His recommendation of a specific staffing firm that specialized in executive support was almost certainly connected to his criminal organization, providing them with another opportunity to place an inside source within my business. The evening concluded with Ryan making romantic gestures that would have seemed thoughtful and loving just days earlier, but now felt like manipulation designed to reinforce my emotional dependence on him and deflect any suspicions I might be developing. As we prepared for bed, he was particularly affectionate, telling me how proud he was of my business success and how lucky he felt to be part of our family. Every word felt like another lie designed to maintain his cover, while he continued his systematic destruction of everything I had built. But lying in bed beside Ryan that night, I was no longer the same woman who had been devastated by Amanda's resignation letter just 24 hours earlier. I was now armed with knowledge, supported by allies, and beginning to formulate a plan that would not only protect my family and business, but would also help bring justice to a criminal organization that had destroyed too many lives already. Ryan had made the mistake of targeting a woman who specialized in crisis management and strategic communication, and he was about to discover that his victim was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The evidence Amanda had gathered was substantial, but I understood that documentation alone would not be sufficient to ensure that Ryan and his associates faced meaningful consequences. I needed to gather additional proof of their ongoing criminal activities, establish connections with other victims who could provide testimony, and work with federal authorities who had the resources and expertise to prosecute a complex conspiracy case. Most importantly, I needed to do all of this while maintaining the facade of normalcy that would prevent Ryan from realizing that his operation had been compromised. As I listened to Ryan's steady breathing beside me, I began planning the next phase of what I was already thinking of as my counteroffensive. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reaching out to Victoria Nash and the other previous victims that Amanda's investigation had identified. I would also start documenting Ryan's current activities, building on Amanda's foundation with real-time evidence of his ongoing criminal behavior. And I would begin the careful process of approaching federal authorities with the comprehensive case that Amanda's courage had made possible. Ryan had spent months studying my weaknesses and exploiting my vulnerabilities, but he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that my success in business was based on luck or circumstances, rather than intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. He was about to learn that the woman he had chosen as his victim possessed all the skills necessary to orchestrate his complete destruction, and that his carefully planned operation was about to become the foundation for his own downfall. The phone number for Victoria Nash that I found in Amanda's files belonged to a law office in Houston's prestigious Galleria district. When I called that Wednesday morning from my locked office, using a burner phone I had purchased with cash during my lunch break, I expected to reach a receptionist or voicemail system. Instead, Victoria herself answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional despite the early hour. Victoria Nash speaking. If this is about the Martinez case, I've been expecting your call. Her directness caught me off guard, though I realized it shouldn't have. If Amanda's investigation was as comprehensive as it appeared, and if Victoria had been coordinating with other victims as the evidence suggested, then my eventual contact would have been anticipated. This is Jessica Martinez, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I found your contact information in my assistant's files. She left a resignation letter warning me about my husband, and I've discovered that everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my business security was a lie. Victoria's sigh was audible across the connection. How long were you married to him? And please, use his real name if you know it. Ryan Martinez is just another identity in a long list of aliases he's used over the years. The question stopped me cold. Ryan Martinez was his real name, wasn't it? The marriage certificate, the background check I had discreetly run before we became serious, the professional references from his real estate company. All of that had to be legitimate. But as I considered Victoria's matter-of-fact tone and Amanda's documentation of the sophisticated nature of the operation, I realized that even Ryan's fundamental identity might be fabricated. 18 months, I replied, feeling foolish for not having questioned more basic assumptions about the man I had married. Everything seemed legitimate. His business, his background, his references. How was I supposed to know that his entire identity was fictional? You weren't, Victoria said, her tone softening with what sounded like genuine sympathy. That's the point of their operation. They spend months, sometimes years, establishing credible identities before they approach their targets. The man you knew as Ryan Martinez has been using that particular identity for almost 4 years, long enough to build a comprehensive professional history and social network that would satisfy even sophisticated background investigations. Victoria's explanation of the criminal organization's methodology was both enlightening and terrifying. According to her research, which had been ongoing for over 2 years since her own victimization, the group specialized in what they called long-term infiltration operations. They would identify successful professional women who met specific criteria, business owners, attorneys, executives, or other individuals with substantial assets and limited family support networks, and then create entirely fictional personas designed to appeal to their target's specific psychological and emotional. The process began with extensive surveillance and intelligence gathering that could last 6 months or more before initial contact was ever made. They would study their target's professional activities, social media presence, dating history, and personal relationships to develop a comprehensive psychological profile. They would identify emotional vulnerabilities, professional challenges, and personal desires that could be exploited during the relationship phase of their operation. In your case, Victoria explained, they would have known that you were a single mother running a successful business, dealing with the challenges of balancing career demands with parenting a teenage daughter. They would have identified your desire for a stable partnership that could provide emotional support without threatening your professional independence. Ryan's persona was specifically crafted to meet those needs while providing him with access to your business operations and financial resources. The sophisticated nature of the identity creation process was staggering. Victoria's investigation had revealed that the criminal organization maintained an entire infrastructure dedicated to manufacturing credible backgrounds for their operatives. They had relationships with corrupt officials who could provide legitimate government documents, connections with businesses that would provide employment verification, and even networks of accomplices who could serve as personal and professional references. The real estate company where Ryan claimed to work exists, Victoria continued, but his position there was part of the cover operation. They have arrangements with dozens of legitimate businesses throughout Texas and surrounding states. The companies receive financial compensation for employing their operatives in positions that provide flexible schedules and credible professional identities, while requiring minimal actual work responsibilities. As Victoria outlined the scope of the organization's capabilities, I began to understand why Amanda had felt compelled to warn me and flee, rather than simply reporting her suspicions to local authorities. This was not a case of individual fraud that could be handled by traditional law enforcement methods. The criminal enterprise operated across state lines, involved sophisticated financial crimes, and had sufficient resources to maintain long-term operations that required substantial upfront investments. How many women have they targeted? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to hear the answer. That we know of. At least 15 over the past 5 years. But Victoria's voice carried the weight of someone who had dedicated significant time and resources to understanding an enemy. The actual number is probably much higher. Most victims never realize they were targeted by an organized operation, rather than simply betrayed by individual partners. Many are too devastated financially and emotionally to pursue justice, and those who do try to fight back often find that local law enforcement lacks the resources or expertise to investigate complex multi-jurisdictional crimes. Victoria's own story was hauntingly similar to what I was experiencing, though her victimization had occurred before the organization had refined their current methodologies. She had been targeted while going through a difficult divorce from her first husband, making her emotionally vulnerable and professionally distracted. The man she had known as David Nash had been charming, supportive, and seemingly successful in his own right as a financial consultant specializing in divorce asset protection. Over the course of their 2-year relationship and eventual marriage, David had systematically gained access to Victoria's law practice finances, client information, and personal assets. But unlike Ryan's more subtle approach to financial manipulation, David's operation had been more aggressive and ultimately less sustainable. When Victoria had finally discovered the truth about his identity and activities, David had already stolen over $800,000 and had been using her client confidentiality agreements to facilitate money laundering operations for other criminal enterprises. The difference between your situation and mine, Victoria explained, is that we now understand their methods, and we have tools to fight back. When I was victimized, I was isolated and had no idea that I was dealing with a professional criminal organization. You have Amanda's documentation, you have advance warning before they've completed their asset stripping, and most importantly, you have connections to other victims who can provide testimony and evidence. Victoria's legal background had proved invaluable in her efforts to build a case against the organization. She had been working with federal authorities for over a year, providing evidence and testimony while connecting with other victims who were willing to cooperate with law enforcement. The challenge was that the criminal enterprise was constantly evolving their methods and identities, making it difficult to build the comprehensive case necessary for successful prosecution. The FBI has been investigating what they call Operation Golden Web for 18 months, Victoria continued. They've identified the core leadership of the organization and have been tracking their financial operations through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. But they need victims who are willing to cooperate with the investigation and testify about their experiences. Most importantly, they need current evidence of ongoing criminal activities rather than just documentation of past crimes. This was where my situation became particularly valuable to the broader investigation. According to Victoria, most victims only discovered the truth about their exploitation after the criminals had completed their asset stripping and disappeared. By the time law enforcement became involved, the evidence was historical, and the perpetrators had moved on to new identities and new targets. But Amanda's early warning meant that I could potentially document Ryan's ongoing criminal activities while they were still in progress. The FBI wants to meet with you, Victoria said without preamble. Special Agent Patricia Coleman has been the lead investigator on Operation Golden Web since its inception. She's been hoping to find a victim who was still in the active phase of an operation and who had the resources and willingness to cooperate with a complex investigation. Your situation could be the key to finally bringing down the entire organization. The prospect of involving federal law enforcement was both reassuring and terrifying. On one hand, it meant that I would have professional support and protection, while dealing with a criminal organization that clearly had significant resources and capabilities. On the other hand, it meant that my personal life, my business operations, and my family's privacy would all become part of a federal investigation that could take years to resolve. Victoria seemed to understand my hesitation. "I know it's overwhelming," she said gently. "But Jessica, these people have destroyed dozens of lives and stolen millions of dollars. They're not going to stop unless someone stops them. And right now, you're in a unique position to provide law enforcement with the evidence they need to dismantle the entire operation." We arranged to meet in person the following day at Victoria's law office in Houston. She insisted that the meeting take place face-to-face rather than over the phone, both for security reasons and because the scope of the evidence she had compiled was too extensive to summarize in a conversation. She also warned me to be extremely careful about my communications and activities over the next 24 hours, as the organization had sophisticated surveillance capabilities and would be monitoring for any signs that their operation had been compromised. The drive from Austin to Houston the next morning felt like crossing into enemy territory, though I realized that the real enemy had been living in my home and sharing my bed for the past 18 months. I had told Ryan that I was meeting with a potential new client who required discretion about their marketing needs, a lie that came disturbingly easily given everything I had learned about deception over the past few days. The irony that I was using professional skills in crisis management to handle my own personal crisis was not lost on me. Victoria's law office occupied an entire floor of a gleaming high-rise building, with panoramic views of downtown Houston and tasteful decor that spoke to both professional success and personal attention to detail. Victoria herself was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 40s, with short auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to assess everything around her with the analytical precision of someone who had learned not to trust surface appearances. The conference room where she led me was equipped with what appeared to be sophisticated security technology, including devices that she explained would prevent any external surveillance of our conversation. The wall-mounted monitors and multiple computer terminals suggested that Victoria's investigation into the criminal organization had become a major focus of her legal practice, requiring resources and technology that went far beyond typical civil litigation. "Before we begin," Victoria said as she closed the conference room door, "I need you to understand that once you see the full scope of what we're dealing with, there will be no going back to ignorance. You'll know too much to simply walk away or pretend that none of this happened. Are you prepared for that level of commitment to seeing this through?" I thought about Emma, about the agency I had built, about all the other women who had been victimized by this organization, and about Amanda's courage in risking her own safety to warn me. "I'm prepared," I said, and meant it completely. Victoria activated the wall-mounted monitors, which immediately displayed what appeared to be an organizational chart, more complex than anything I had seen outside of major corporate presentations. The diagram showed interconnected networks of individuals, businesses, and financial entities that spanned multiple states and included dozens of different criminal enterprises. At the center of the web were 5 individuals whose photographs I recognized with a shock that made my stomach clench. One of the central figures was Ryan, though the photograph showed him with different hair and facial hair than the appearance I knew. But more disturbing were the other faces I recognized. Drive. James Wilson, the supposed family therapist who had been counseling our family, and Marcus Webb, the private investigator who had been helping Amanda document the surveillance of my computer systems. They were not separate individuals who had been recruited or deceived, but core members of the criminal organization who had been playing coordinated roles in Ryan's operation against me. Dr. Wilson has been conducting psychological evaluations for the organization for over 3 years, Victoria explained, watching my reaction carefully. His role is to assess targets' emotional vulnerabilities and provide guidance on manipulation strategies. The therapy sessions you attended weren't just intelligence gathering. They were active psychological manipulation designed to increase your emotional dependence on Ryan while identifying pressure points that could be exploited if you became suspicious. The revelation that even the family therapy had been part of the criminal operation was devastating on a level one had not anticipated. Emma had participated in those sessions, sharing personal information about her feelings and concerns with someone who was actively working to harm our family. The violation of trust was so complete that it took several minutes for me to process the implications fully. And Marcus Webb? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the answer. Marcus has been the organization's technical specialist for over 4 years. His job is to install surveillance software, monitor targets' digital communications, and provide counter-surveillance services when needed. When Amanda contacted him about suspicious activities, she thought she was reaching out to an independent investigator. Instead, she was reporting directly to the people who were committing the crimes she had discovered. The realization that Amanda had been manipulated as well, that her attempts to investigate and document Ryan's crimes had actually been monitored and controlled by the organization itself, added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. But it also explained how Amanda had been able to gather such comprehensive evidence. Marcus had been feeding her information as part of a larger strategy to test the organization's security and identify potential weaknesses in their operations. So everything Amanda discovered, they know that she discovered? I asked, beginning to understand why she had felt compelled to flee rather than simply warning me. Not everything, Victoria said, switching to a different monitor that displayed what appeared to be financial records and communication logs. Amanda was more sophisticated than they realized. She had been creating duplicate records and using encrypted storage systems that Marcus didn't know about. When she finally understood that Marcus was part of the organization, she had already compiled enough independent evidence to build a comprehensive case. Victoria's explanation of Amanda's final weeks on the job revealed a woman who had been operating under extraordinary pressure while maintaining perfect professional composure. Once Amanda had realized that the private investigator she thought was helping her was actually part of the criminal organization, she had understood that she was completely alone and that any misstep could result in serious personal consequences. Amanda's strategy was brilliant, Victoria continued. She fed Marcus enough real information to convince him that she was cooperative and naive, while secretly documenting everything through independent channels. When she finally warned you and left, Marcus and the rest of the organization believed that she had simply panicked and fled without taking any evidence with her. The encrypted drives that Amanda had hidden in my office safe, drives that I had discovered but not yet fully examined, contained the real documentation that could be used against the organization. The files I had found on Amanda's computer were only a portion of her investigation, carefully curated to provide me with enough information to understand the situation, while not revealing the full extent of her evidence gathering. As Victoria walked me through Amanda's complete documentation, I began to understand not just the scope of the criminal organization, but also the carefully planned strategy that had been developed to finally bring them to justice. Amanda's role had been much more than that of a concerned employee who had stumbled onto suspicious activities. She had been working with Victoria and federal authorities for months, serving as an inside source while building the evidence necessary for a comprehensive prosecution. Amanda is not hiding because she's afraid, Victoria explained. She's in protective custody, working with the FBI to prepare for the arrests and trials that will begin once we've completed the evidence-gathering phase. Her warning to you was the signal that the investigation was ready to move into its final stage. The relief I felt at learning that Amanda was safe was immediately followed by the realization that I was now expected to play a crucial role in that final stage. The evidence Amanda had gathered was substantial, but federal prosecutors needed current documentation of ongoing criminal activities to ensure successful convictions. My position as Ryan's unsuspecting wife provided a unique opportunity to document the organization's operations while they were still active. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said, though I was beginning to understand the scope of what would be required. Victoria's smile was grim but determined. We're asking you to help us destroy them completely, and we're going to give you all the tools and support you need to make sure they never hurt anyone again. The FBI safe house in Northwest Austin looked like any other suburban home in the affluent Steiner Ranch development, complete with a perfectly manicured lawn and a minivan in the driveway that suggested a typical family residence. But the sophisticated security equipment hidden behind ordinary window treatments, and the federal agents posing as neighbors, revealed the true nature of the operation that had been established to support the final phase of Operation Golden Web. Special Agent Patricia Coleman was not what I had expected from Victoria's descriptions of the lead investigator. She was younger than I had anticipated, probably in her late 30s, with shoulder-length blonde hair and a professional demeanor that somehow managed to be both reassuring and intimidating. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her questions precise in a way that suggested she had been preparing for this meeting as carefully as I had been dreading it. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Coleman began as we settled into the safe house's converted conference room, "I want you to understand from the beginning that what we're asking you to do involves significant personal risk. The organization we're targeting has demonstrated a willingness to use violence when their operations are threatened, and your cooperation with our investigation will put you in a position where that violence could be directed at you and your family." The bluntness of her warning was both appreciated and terrifying. After days of discovering layers of deception in my own life, I valued Agent Coleman's direct approach, even as it forced me to confront the reality that Emma and I could become targets of retaliation if Ryan's organization discovered my cooperation with federal authorities. "What kind of violence are we talking about?" I asked, needing to understand the full scope of the danger before I could make an informed decision about participation. Agent Coleman opened a thick file folder and spread several photographs across the conference table. The images showed crime scenes, hospital records, and police reports that painted a disturbing picture of what happened to people who threatened the organization's operations. 2 former victims who had attempted to expose the conspiracy had been killed in what appeared to be random accidents: a car crash in Dallas and a home invasion in San Antonio. 3 others had been hospitalized after apparent muggings that resulted in serious injuries and clear warnings to cease their investigative activities. "We believe the organization has access to professional killers who specialize in creating plausible accidents and random crimes," Agent Coleman explained. "They don't typically resort to violence unless they feel their core operations are threatened, but they have demonstrated both the capability and willingness to eliminate problems when necessary." The photographs were sobering reminders that this was not simply a white-collar crime investigation, but a confrontation with people who had killed to protect their criminal enterprise. But as I studied the evidence of their violence, I also saw the faces of women who had been targeted just as I had been targeted, who had suffered just as I was suffering, and who had been willing to risk everything to prevent other women from experiencing the same victimization. "What protections can you provide for my daughter?" I asked, focusing on my most important priority. "Emma will be relocated to a secure facility with full-time protection until the arrests are completed," Agent Coleman replied without hesitation. "We have arrangements with several private schools that cooperate with federal witness protection programs. She'll be able to continue her education and maintain contact with selected friends and family members, but her location and daily activities will be completely secure." The prospect of sending Emma away, even temporarily, was heartbreaking. But the alternative of leaving her vulnerable to retaliation from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill was unacceptable. Emma's safety was more important than maintaining normal family routines, and I trusted that Agent Coleman's protective arrangements would be more secure than anything I could provide independently. "How long would the investigation take?" I asked, beginning to accept the reality that cooperation was the only viable option. 6 to 8 weeks for the evidence-gathering phase," Agent Coleman replied. "Then potentially 12 to 18 months for the prosecution phase, depending on whether the defendants choose to go to trial or accept plea agreements. But the most dangerous period for you and Emma will be the next 2 months, while we're documenting their ongoing criminal activities." Agent Coleman's explanation of the investigation strategy was both comprehensive and terrifying. The FBI had been building cases against the organization's leadership for over 2 years, but they needed current evidence of ongoing crimes to ensure successful prosecution under federal racketeering statutes. My role would be to continue my normal relationship with Ryan while wearing sophisticated recording equipment that would document his criminal activities and his communications with other organization members. The recording technology was far more advanced than anything I had seen in movies or television shows. The primary device was a nearly invisible transmitter that would be surgically implanted under my skin, providing continuous audio monitoring without any external equipment that could be discovered during physical contact. Secondary devices included modified jewelry, clothing accessories, and household items that would provide backup recording capabilities and ensure comprehensive documentation of conversations. The implanted device will record everything within a 30-foot radius and transmit the audio in real time to our monitoring station, Agent Coleman explained, as she showed me the tiny electronic component that would become part of my body. We'll have agents listening to every conversation you have with Ryan, and will be able to intervene immediately if you're in immediate danger. The thought of having federal agents listening to every intimate moment of my marriage was deeply unsettling, but I understood that comprehensive surveillance was necessary to ensure both my safety and the success of the investigation. Ryan's organization had demonstrated sophisticated capabilities in detecting surveillance and counterintelligence activities, so the FBI's monitoring would need to be equally sophisticated to avoid detection. More challenging than the technical aspects of the operation was the psychological preparation for maintaining my cover while knowing everything I now knew about Ryan's true nature. Agent Coleman had arranged for me to work with Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who specialized in preparing undercover operatives and witnesses for extended periods of deception under high-stress conditions. Dr. Chen's training sessions were intensive and emotionally exhausting. She taught me techniques for controlling my emotional responses, managing stress-related physical symptoms, and maintaining consistent behavior patterns that would not alert Ryan to my changed circumstances. Most importantly, she helped me develop strategies for psychologically protecting myself from the continued emotional manipulation that Ryan would undoubtedly employ as the investigation progressed. The most dangerous aspect of your situation, Dr. Chen explained during one of our preparation sessions, is that Ryan has been studying your psychological responses for 18 months. He knows your emotional triggers, your decision-making patterns, and your behavioral habits better than you probably know them yourself. Any significant change in your reactions or responses could alert him that something has changed. The training required me to practice scenarios where Ryan would test my loyalty, probe for information about my suspicions, or attempt to manipulate me into making decisions that would benefit his criminal activities. Dr. Chen would play Ryan's role, using information from Amanda's psychological profiles to replicate his manipulation techniques with disturbing accuracy. The sessions were emotionally brutal, but they prepared me for the reality of continuing my relationship with someone who viewed me as both a target and a potential threat. The most difficult aspect of the preparation was learning to suppress my natural desire for confrontation and justice. Everything in my nature wanted to expose Ryan immediately, to demand explanations for his betrayal, and to ensure that he faced immediate consequences for his crimes. But the investigation's success depended on my ability to maintain normal behavior patterns while gathering evidence that would ensure not just Ryan's prosecution, but the destruction of the entire criminal organization. Emma's relocation was handled with a professionalism that was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Agent Coleman's team had developed a cover story about a specialized academic opportunity that required Emma to spend the remainder of the school year at a private academy in Colorado. The story was detailed enough to satisfy any inquiries Ryan might make, while providing Emma with a legitimate educational experience that would minimize the disruption to her long-term academic plans. The morning Emma left for her academic program was one of the most difficult of my life. I could not tell her the truth about why she was leaving, could not explain that her stepfather was a criminal who might pose a threat to her safety, and could not provide her with any timeline for when she would be able to return home. All I could do was hold her tightly and promise that everything would be fine, while knowing that I was about to embark on the most dangerous period of my life. Ryan's reaction to Emma's departure was carefully observed by the FBI surveillance team. His questions about the academic program were probing but not suspicious, suggesting that he accepted the cover story without recognizing it as a protective measure. But the agents noted subtle changes in his behavior that suggested he was conducting his own investigation into Emma's sudden opportunity, probably as a routine security measure rather than from specific suspicions about my activities. The first week of the active investigation was terrifying in its normalcy. I continued my daily routines at the agency, maintained my regular schedule of client meetings and business activities, and interacted with Ryan as if nothing had changed in our relationship. But every conversation was being recorded, every gesture was being analyzed by federal agents, and every moment carried the potential for discovery and retaliation. Ryan's behavior during this period provided crucial evidence of his ongoing criminal activities. The recording devices documented numerous phone conversations with other organization members, including detailed discussions about current operations against new targets in Dallas and San Antonio. His communications revealed that the organization was actively targeting at least 6 other women, suggesting that my situation was just one of multiple ongoing operations. Most damaging to Ryan's eventual prosecution were recordings of his conversations with Dr. Wilson about manipulation strategies for maintaining my compliance and cooperation. The discussions revealed not only the depth of their psychological manipulation techniques, but also their awareness that several previous victims had become suspicious, and their strategies for preventing similar problems in future operations. "Jessica has been more compliant than we anticipated," Ryan told Dr. Wilson during one recorded conversation. "The daughter's removal was handled perfectly, and she seems to have accepted the academic program explanation without question. But I want to accelerate the asset transfer timeline. The longer this operation continues, the greater the risk of exposure." The reference to accelerating asset transfers was particularly significant because it indicated that Ryan was planning to complete his theft of my business and personal resources more quickly than originally planned. Agent Coleman's team immediately began implementing additional security measures to prevent Ryan from accessing agency accounts or transferring any additional funds without my knowledge. But Ryan's conversation also revealed something that chilled me to the bone. His reference to Emma's removal being handled perfectly suggested that her relocation had not been as secret as Agent Coleman had assured me. Ryan was aware that Emma was no longer living at home, though he apparently believed it was part of a legitimate academic program rather than a protective measure. The realization that Ryan was monitoring Emma's movements and activities, even when she was supposedly safe in federal protection, added a new dimension of urgency to the investigation. If the organization had sufficient surveillance capabilities to track Emma's relocation, then they might also have the ability to detect other aspects of the FBI's operation. Agent Coleman's response to this development was swift and comprehensive. Emma was immediately moved to a different facility with enhanced security measures, and additional counter-surveillance teams were deployed to ensure that the organization could not track or threaten her. But the incident revealed that Ryan's criminal organization had resources and capabilities that even the FBI had underestimated. As the investigation entered its 3rd week, Ryan began implementing what Agent Coleman recognized as preparation for the final phase of his operation. His conversations revealed plans for a romantic getaway to the organization's compound in Costa Rica, supposedly to celebrate the resolution of some unspecified business challenges. But the FBI's analysis of similar conversations from previous operations indicated that these romantic getaways were typically when the organization's targets were killed and their assets were finally transferred to offshore accounts. "He's planning to murder you during the Costa Rica trip," Agent Coleman told me bluntly during one of our daily briefings. "The pattern is consistent with their previous operations. They arrange what appears to be a romantic vacation, then stage an accident that kills the victim, while leaving the husband free to inherit all assets without suspicion." The knowledge that Ryan was actively planning my murder was both terrifying and oddly liberating. It confirmed beyond any doubt that every moment of our relationship had been based on deception and criminal intent, eliminating any lingering emotional attachment I might have felt for the man I had married. But it also meant that the investigation was approaching its most dangerous phase, when the risk of discovery would be highest and the consequences of any mistakes would be fatal. The FBI's strategy for the final confrontation was designed to catch Ryan and his associates in the act of planning my murder, while simultaneously gathering evidence of their broader criminal activities. Agent Coleman's team had arranged for Ryan to believe that I was eagerly anticipating our Costa Rica vacation, while actually planning to arrest the entire organization during what they expected to be a planning meeting for my assassination. The meeting was scheduled to take place at a luxury resort outside Austin, where Ryan believed he would be coordinating with other organization members to finalize the details of my murder and asset transfer. Instead, he would be walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would provide federal agents with recordings of detailed criminal plans and enough evidence to ensure successful prosecution of everyone involved. The night before the planned confrontation, Ryan was particularly affectionate and attentive, telling me how much he loved me and how excited he was about our future together. His performance was flawless, demonstrating the same emotional manipulation skills that had initially attracted me to him. But now that I understood the professional nature of his deception, every word felt like another piece of evidence that would eventually be used to convict him. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect," Ryan whispered as we prepared for bed. "After tomorrow, we'll never have to worry about anything again." He was right about one thing. After tomorrow, neither of us would ever have to worry about his criminal activities again. But the resolution would be very different from what he was anticipating. The luxury resort meeting took place in a private conference room that had been completely equipped with FBI surveillance equipment. Every word, every gesture, and every criminal plan would be recorded in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Ryan arrived at the meeting confident and relaxed, believing he was coordinating the final details of a successful criminal operation. Instead, he was providing federal prosecutors with everything they needed to ensure his conviction and life imprisonment. The meeting participants included Dr. Wilson, Marcus Webb, and 3 other organization members, whose roles in previous operations had been documented but never fully proven. Their discussion was comprehensive and damning, covering not only the specific plans for my murder, but also detailed reviews of their previous operations and strategies for future targets. "The Martinez operation has been our most profitable to date," Ryan told the group with obvious satisfaction. "Between the business assets and the life insurance policies, we're looking at over $2 million in liquid assets plus ongoing revenue from the client relationships we've inherited. The psychological manipulation has been textbook perfect, and she has no suspicion that anything is wrong." The irony of Ryan's confident assessment was that, at that very moment, federal agents were positioned throughout the resort, recording every word of his confession while preparing to arrest everyone in the room. His belief that the operation had been textbook perfect was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. When Agent Coleman and her team burst into the conference room with weapons drawn and arrest warrants, Ryan's expression changed from confidence to shock to desperate calculation in a matter of seconds. But there was nowhere to run, no way to explain away the recorded confessions, and no possibility of escape from the consequences of years of criminal activities. "Ryan Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, and numerous other federal crimes," Agent Coleman announced as Ryan was handcuffed and read his rights. The other organization members were arrested simultaneously, with coordinated raids taking place at their homes and businesses throughout Texas. The media coverage of the arrests was extensive, revealing for the first time the scope of what federal authorities called one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations ever dismantled in the United States. The story dominated local and national news for weeks, with detailed reporting on the organization's methods, their numerous victims, and the investigation that had finally brought them to justice. My role in the investigation was initially kept confidential to protect my safety and privacy, but I eventually chose to speak publicly about my experience in hopes that it would help other women recognize the warning signs of similar operations. The interviews were difficult, requiring me to relive the emotional trauma of discovering that my marriage was built on lies and that my husband had been planning to murder me. But I also found the public attention to be oddly cathartic, providing me with an opportunity to reclaim my narrative and demonstrate that victims of sophisticated fraud could fight back and win. The trial proceedings took over a year, with Ryan and his associates facing dozens of federal charges related to their various criminal activities. The evidence was overwhelming, including not only the recordings from the resort meeting, but also comprehensive financial records, victim testimony, and physical evidence that linked the organization to multiple murders and assaults. Ryan's defense strategy was pathetic in its desperation. His attorneys attempted to portray him as a victim of the organization's manipulation, claiming that he had been coerced into participating in criminal activities against his will. But the recordings of his enthusiastic planning for my murder, combined with evidence of his leadership role in targeting other victims, made this defense completely unbelievable. The sentencing hearing was the final chapter in a legal process that had consumed nearly 2 years of my life. Ryan received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to target innocent women for financial exploitation and murder. Dr. Wilson and Marcus Webb received similar sentences, while several other organization members accepted plea agreements in exchange for their cooperation with ongoing investigations. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was the comprehensive asset forfeiture that returned stolen money to the organization's victims. The FBI's financial investigation had traced millions of dollars through offshore accounts and shell companies, recovering funds that had been stolen from dozens of women over the course of several years. While money could never fully compensate for the emotional trauma and violated trust, the financial recovery did provide practical resources for rebuilding lives and businesses that had been damaged by the organization's activities. Emma returned home safely after Ryan's arrest, though the experience of learning about her stepfather's true nature was traumatic for her as well. We worked with family counselors who specialized in helping families recover from criminal victimization, and Emma's resilience and maturity helped her process the situation more successfully than I had initially feared. Her relationship with me was actually strengthened by the crisis, as she gained new appreciation for the sacrifices I had made to protect her, and the courage I had shown in fighting back against people who had threatened our family. The Martinez Creative Agency not only survived the investigation, but actually grew stronger as a result of the media attention and the business community's respect for how I had handled the crisis. Several major clients specifically chose to work with us because of the leadership and integrity I had demonstrated during the most difficult period of my life. The agency's reputation for crisis management was enhanced by my personal experience with successfully navigating an impossible situation, and we began specializing in helping other businesses and individuals deal with criminal victimization and reputation management. 3 years after Ryan's arrest, I was invited to speak at a conference for successful professional women about recognizing and protecting against sophisticated fraud operations. The audience included attorneys, executives, business owners, and other women whose success made them potential targets for the type of criminal organization that had targeted me. My presentation focused not only on warning signs and protective measures, but also on the importance of fighting back when victimization occurs. The criminals who target successful women count on our isolation, our embarrassment, and our desire to handle problems privately, I told the audience. They assume that we'll be too proud to admit we've been deceived, and too concerned about our reputations to pursue public justice. But every time we choose silence over justice, we enable them to target other women who deserve our protection. The response to my presentation was overwhelming, with dozens of women approaching me afterward to share their own experiences with financial manipulation, romantic fraud, and professional exploitation. Many had never reported their experiences to law enforcement because they were embarrassed about being deceived or concerned about the impact on their careers. But hearing about my experience and the successful prosecution of my attackers gave them confidence that justice was possible and that victims could fight back effectively. I began working with federal authorities and victim advocacy organizations to develop training programs for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and financial institutions about recognizing and investigating sophisticated fraud operations. The criminal organization that had targeted me was not unique, and similar operations were active throughout the country, targeting successful women with the same methodologies that had been used against me. The work was both professionally fulfilling and personally healing, providing me with a sense of purpose that transformed my victimization into advocacy for other women who had experienced similar betrayals. Every training session I conducted, every case I helped investigate, and every victim I supported represented a victory against the criminal mentality that viewed successful women as nothing more than profitable targets. 5 years after the investigation began, I received a letter from Amanda Chen, who had completed her cooperation with federal authorities and was beginning a new career in cybersecurity consulting. Her letter was brief but meaningful, expressing gratitude for my courage in following through on the investigation she had initiated, and pride in the positive outcomes that had resulted from our combined efforts. "You turned the worst betrayal imaginable into a victory for justice," Amanda wrote. "Every woman who avoids victimization because of the awareness you've created, every criminal who thinks twice before targeting a successful woman because of the prosecutions you made possible, and every victim who finds the courage to fight back because of the example you set, represents proof that evil doesn't always win." Amanda was right about the broader impact of our experience. The prosecutions had received national media attention, leading to increased awareness about sophisticated fraud operations and enhanced training for law enforcement officers throughout the country. Several states had passed legislation specifically targeting the type of long-term infiltration operations that had been used against me, and federal agencies had developed new protocols for investigating complex multi-jurisdictional financial crimes. But perhaps the most important outcome was personal rather than professional. The experience had taught me that strength comes not from avoiding betrayal and victimization, but from responding to those experiences with courage, determination, and commitment to justice. I had discovered capabilities within myself that I had never known existed, and I had learned that even the most sophisticated criminal operations could be defeated by ordinary people who refused to accept victimization quietly. Today, the Martinez Creative Agency continues to thrive. Emma is excelling in college with plans to study criminal justice and victim advocacy, and I have built a new life based on truth, justice, and authentic relationships, rather than the lies and manipulation that had characterized my marriage to Ryan. The scars from that experience will always be part of my story, but they no longer define my future or limit my potential. The criminal organization that thought they could destroy my life and murder me for profit learned that they had chosen the wrong target. Instead of becoming another statistic in their list of successful operations, I became the catalyst for their complete destruction and the advocate for other women who deserved protection from similar predators. Ryan Martinez and his associates will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, where they can no longer target innocent women or profit from sophisticated criminal operations. And every day that they remain behind bars represents a victory for every woman they victimized and every potential victim they will never have the opportunity to harm. Justice was not just served. It was delivered with the full force of a woman who refused to be destroyed by those who underestimated her strength, her intelligence, and her determination to fight back. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, law enforcement officials, and survivors of what the prosecutor had termed the most elaborate criminal conspiracy targeting successful women in modern American history. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Victoria Nash and Agent Coleman, watching as Ryan Martinez and his co-conspirators received their final sentences. The man who had shared my bed, gained my trust, and planned my murder sat motionless at the defendant's table as Judge Patricia Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, delivered life sentences without possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and organized financial crimes. The 18 months between Ryan's arrest and this moment had transformed me in ways I could never have anticipated. The woman who had discovered Amanda's resignation letter and stumbled into a web of deception had evolved into someone who understood not only her own strength, but also her responsibility to use that strength to protect others. The terror and betrayal I had experienced had been transmuted into purpose and determination that now defined every aspect of my life. Emma had returned home safely after Ryan's arrest, though the process of rebuilding our family life required extensive counseling and careful attention to the psychological impact of learning that her stepfather had been a professional criminal. At 17, she possessed a maturity and resilience that allowed her to process the situation more successfully than I had initially feared. More importantly, she had developed a fierce protective instinct toward other potential victims and had already begun talking about pursuing a career in criminal justice or victim advocacy. "Mom," she had said during one of our family therapy sessions, "I know you blame yourself for not seeing through Ryan's lies, but you need to understand that you saved us both. If you hadn't been brave enough to fight back, we might both be dead, and he would have moved on to destroy other families. You didn't just survive, you stopped a monster." Emma's perspective on our experience had become a crucial part of my own healing process. Her ability to see past the trauma to the positive outcomes that had resulted from our ordeal helped me recognize that my response to victimization had been far more important than the victimization itself. The courage I had found in the darkest moment of my life had not only saved us, but had also prevented dozens of other women from experiencing similar betrayals. The Martinez Creative Agency had not only survived the investigation and media attention, but had actually grown stronger as a result of the crisis. The business community's response to my experience had been overwhelmingly supportive, with several major corporations specifically choosing to work with us because of the leadership and integrity I had demonstrated during the most difficult period of my life. Our client base had expanded to include organizations throughout Texas and surrounding states, many of whom were seeking crisis management expertise from someone who had successfully navigated an impossible situation. But more importantly, the agency had developed a specialization in helping other businesses and individuals deal with criminal victimization, fraud recovery, and reputation management following personal or professional betrayals. We had become the go-to resource for executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals who found themselves dealing with criminal exploitation or systematic deception. The skills I had developed in fighting back against Ryan's organization had translated into a comprehensive service offering that helped other victims reclaim their lives and businesses. Lisa Rodriguez had become more than just my business partner during the investigation and recovery process. She had demonstrated loyalty and courage that went far beyond professional obligations, managing the agency's operations during the most dangerous phases of the FBI investigation, while providing emotional support that had been crucial to my ability to maintain my cover with Ryan. When the media attention began and clients started seeking our services specifically because of our experience with criminal victimization, Lisa had been instrumental in developing our crisis management protocols and victim advocacy services. "You know what I admire most about how you handled this situation?" Lisa had said during one of our strategy sessions. "You never let them turn you into a victim permanently. You used what happened to you as a foundation for helping other people, and you transformed the worst experience of your life into something positive for dozens of other families." The specialized services we now offered included comprehensive security assessments for high-net-worth individuals, particularly successful women who might be targeted by sophisticated fraud operations. We worked with private investigators, cybersecurity experts, and legal professionals to provide holistic protection strategies that addressed both digital and physical security concerns. Our experience with Ryan's organization had taught us to recognize the warning signs of professional criminal operations and to implement protective measures that could prevent successful infiltration. We also provided crisis management services for individuals and businesses dealing with the aftermath of criminal victimization. Many of our clients were executives or business owners who had discovered that trusted employees, romantic partners, or professional associates had been systematically defrauding them. The psychological impact of such betrayals often exceeded the financial damage, and our services included both practical support for legal and financial recovery and emotional guidance for processing the trauma of violated trust. One of our most successful programs was a training curriculum we had developed for law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and legal professionals about recognizing and investigating sophisticated fraud operations. The program was based on the comprehensive documentation that Amanda had gathered and the investigation techniques that the FBI had used to dismantle Ryan's organization. We had conducted training sessions in over 20 states, helping hundreds of professionals develop the expertise necessary to identify and prosecute similar criminal enterprises. The training program had led to the discovery and prosecution of at least 6 other criminal organizations that were using similar methodologies to target successful women throughout the country. Each successful prosecution represented multiple lives saved and significant financial losses prevented. The ripple effect of our experience with Ryan's organization had extended far beyond our own recovery to create systemic improvements in how law enforcement and financial institutions addressed sophisticated fraud operations. Amanda Chen had completed her cooperation with federal authorities and had launched her own cybersecurity consulting firm, specializing in digital forensics and fraud detection. We maintained regular contact, and she had become one of our most trusted partners for clients who needed technical expertise in documenting and prosecuting digital crimes. Her experience in gathering evidence against Ryan's organization while maintaining her cover had provided her with unique insights into criminal methodology and investigation techniques. "The most important thing I learned from our experience," Amanda had told me during one of our quarterly meetings, "is that criminals like Ryan's organization count on their victims being isolated and ashamed. They assume that successful women will be too proud to admit they've been deceived and too concerned about their reputations to fight back publicly. But every time we choose justice over silence, we make it harder for them to target other women." Amanda's cybersecurity firm had developed specialized services for detecting the type of digital surveillance and financial manipulation that Ryan had used against me. Her clients included executives, attorneys, and business owners who were concerned about potential exploitation by romantic partners, business associates, or employees with access to sensitive information. The detection systems she had created could identify unauthorized access to computer systems, suspicious financial transactions, and other indicators of professional criminal operations. Victoria Nash had become more than just an ally in the investigation against Ryan's organization. She had evolved into a close friend and professional collaborator, whose legal expertise complemented our crisis management and victim advocacy services. Her law practice had expanded to include a specialized division focused on civil litigation against organized fraud operations, helping victims recover stolen assets and obtain damages for the emotional and professional harm they had suffered. What you accomplished goes far beyond just bringing Ryan and his associates to justice, Victoria had said during the one-year anniversary of the arrests. You created a model for how victims of sophisticated crimes can fight back effectively. Every woman who finds the courage to report suspicious activities, every law enforcement officer who recognizes the warning signs of organized fraud, and every prosecution that results from improved investigation techniques represents a continuation of what you started. Victoria's legal practice had recovered over $12 million in stolen assets for victims of various fraud operations, much of it traced through the investigation techniques and financial analysis methods that had been developed during the case against Ryan's organization. The civil litigation had also resulted in significant judgments against financial institutions and other businesses that had failed to implement adequate security measures to prevent sophisticated fraud operations. The personal transformation I had experienced was perhaps even more significant than the professional growth that had resulted from our ordeal. The discovery that my marriage was built on lies and that my husband had been planning to murder me had initially shattered my confidence in my own judgment and my ability to trust other people. But the process of fighting back and achieving justice had taught me that strength comes not from avoiding betrayal and victimization, but from responding to those experiences with courage and determination. The relationship I had developed with Dr. Marcus Thompson, a fellow business owner who had been introduced to me through our victim advocacy work, was built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that was completely different from the manipulation and deception that had characterized my marriage to Ryan. Marcus owned a successful technology consulting firm and had his own experience with professional betrayal, though in his case it had involved a business partner who had stolen intellectual property rather than a romantic partner who had planned murder. Our relationship had developed slowly and carefully, with both of us bringing hard-earned wisdom about the importance of transparency and authentic communication. Marcus understood the lingering effects of systematic deception and was patient with my need for verification and reassurance about his background and motivations. More importantly, he supported my advocacy work and understood that my experience with criminal victimization had become a defining aspect of my identity and purpose. What I admire most about you, Marcus had said during one of our early conversations, is not that you survived what Ryan did to you, but that you transformed the experience into something that helps other people. You didn't just recover from victimization, you became someone who prevents other people from experiencing similar harm. Emma had thrived during her senior year of high school, despite the disruption and trauma associated with learning about Ryan's true nature. Her experience had motivated her to pursue a double major in criminal justice and psychology, with plans to attend law school and eventually work as a prosecutor, specializing in complex fraud cases. At 18, she possessed an understanding of criminal psychology and victim advocacy that most adults never developed, and her determination to use her experience to help other people reflected the same transformation that had occurred in my own life. I want to be the prosecutor who puts people like Ryan in prison for the rest of their lives, Emma had said during her college application essays. I want other victims to know that justice is possible, and that they don't have to accept being destroyed by people who think successful women are easy targets. Emma's academic performance and extracurricular activities had actually improved following Ryan's arrest, as if the resolution of the threat he had represented had freed her to focus on her own goals and ambitions. She had become a peer counselor for other students dealing with family trauma, and she had organized several fundraising events for victim advocacy organizations. Her resilience and maturity had become an inspiration not only to me, but to other families dealing with the aftermath of criminal victimization. The media attention surrounding Ryan's prosecution had evolved from initial sensationalism to thoughtful coverage of the broader issues related to sophisticated fraud operations and victim advocacy. I had been interviewed by numerous television programs, newspapers, and magazines, and I had used each opportunity to educate the public about warning signs and protective measures while encouraging other victims to seek justice rather than suffering in silence. The most impactful media appearance had been a documentary about organized fraud operations that featured extensive interviews with me, Amanda, Victoria, and several other victims and law enforcement officials. The documentary had won several awards and had been used as training material by law enforcement agencies throughout the country. More importantly, it had generated hundreds of calls to victim advocacy hotlines from women who recognized similar patterns in their own relationships or professional situations. The documentary changed everything about how we think about these crimes, Agent Coleman had said during the film's premiere. Before Jessica's case, most law enforcement agencies treated romantic fraud and financial exploitation as individual crimes committed by opportunistic criminals. Now we understand that many of these cases involve organized criminal enterprises that require sophisticated investigation techniques and interagency cooperation. The documentary had also led to congressional hearings about federal resources for investigating complex fraud operations and victim protection programs. Several new laws had been passed that enhanced penalties for organized fraud operations and provided additional funding for victim services and law enforcement training. The legislative changes were directly traceable to the publicity generated by our case and the advocacy work that had followed. 5 years after Amanda's resignation letter had exposed Ryan's true nature, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Economic Crimes and Victim Advocacy. The audience included federal prosecutors, FBI agents, victim advocates, and survivors from throughout the country. My presentation focused on the transformation that was possible when victims chose to fight back, rather than accepting victimization quietly. The criminals who targeted me made one crucial miscalculation, I told the audience. They assumed that my success in business was based on luck or circumstances, rather than intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. They thought they could exploit my emotional vulnerabilities while ignoring my professional capabilities. But every skill I had developed in building my business became a weapon I could use against them. The response to my presentation was overwhelming, with dozens of attendees approaching me afterward to share their own experiences and seek advice about advocacy strategies. Many were law enforcement officials who had been inspired to develop specialized expertise in investigating complex fraud operations. Others were survivors who had found the courage to pursue justice after hearing about the successful prosecution of Ryan's organization. The conference had also provided an opportunity to announce the establishment of the Amanda Chen Foundation for Fraud Prevention and Victim Advocacy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to education, investigation support, and victim services related to sophisticated criminal operations. The foundation was funded through a combination of recovered assets from criminal prosecutions, donations from businesses and individuals who supported our advocacy work, and grants from federal and state agencies that recognized the importance of our mission. The foundation's services included a confidential hotline for reporting suspicious activities, financial support for victims who needed legal representation or investigative assistance, and educational programs for businesses, schools, and community organizations. We had also established a scholarship program for students pursuing careers in criminal justice, victim advocacy, or related fields, with preference given to survivors of criminal victimization who wanted to use their experiences to help other people. Emma had been one of the first recipients of the Foundation's scholarship program, though she had insisted that the award be based on her academic merit and advocacy activities, rather than her relationship to the Foundation's founder. Her independence and determination to succeed on her own terms reflected the strength and integrity that had helped our family survive the most difficult period of our lives. The Foundation had also funded research into the psychological and social factors that made certain individuals vulnerable to sophisticated fraud operations. The research had revealed that traditional advice about trusting your instincts was often inadequate when dealing with professional criminals who had been trained to exploit those instincts through systematic manipulation. Instead, the research emphasized the importance of verification, independent investigation, and maintaining support networks that could provide objective perspectives on potentially manipulative relationships. One of the most significant research findings was that successful women were often targeted specifically because their professional success had required them to develop trust-based relationships with employees, clients, and business partners. The same interpersonal skills that made them effective leaders also made them vulnerable to exploitation by criminals who understood how to mimic the qualities of trustworthy business associates and romantic partners. The research had led to the development of new training programs for executives and entrepreneurs about recognizing and protecting against sophisticated manipulation techniques. The programs emphasized the importance of maintaining professional skepticism even in personal relationships, implementing verification procedures for financial and legal decisions, and seeking independent advice when making major life changes that involve trusting new people with access to assets or sensitive information. 7 years after the investigation began, Ryan Martinez and his associates remained in federal prison serving life sentences without possibility of parole. Periodic attempts at appeals had been unsuccessful, and the comprehensive evidence that had been gathered during the investigation had withstood every legal challenge. The criminal organization they had operated had been completely dismantled, with its assets forfeited to provide restitution to victims and fund ongoing law enforcement efforts. But perhaps more importantly, the awareness that had been created through our advocacy work had prevented countless other women from experiencing similar victimization. Law enforcement agencies throughout the country had developed expertise in recognizing and investigating sophisticated fraud operations. Financial institutions had implemented enhanced security measures to detect and prevent systematic asset theft. And most importantly, potential victims had access to information and resources that could help them recognize warning signs and seek help before criminal operations could be completed successfully. The personal satisfaction I derived from this broader impact was far greater than any sense of revenge or retribution related to Ryan's imprisonment. Every successful investigation that resulted from improved training, every victim who found the courage to report suspicious activities, and every criminal who chose a different target because potential victims were better protected, represented a victory that extended far beyond our own experience. The Martinez Creative Agency continued to thrive as both a traditional marketing firm and a specialized crisis management consultancy. Our reputation for integrity and expertise had attracted clients throughout the region, and our victim advocacy services had become a model for other professional service firms that wanted to use their expertise to address social problems. The business I had built before Ryan entered my life had not only survived his attempts to destroy it, but had evolved into something more meaningful and impactful than I had ever imagined possible. Emma graduated from college with highest honors and was accepted into law school with a full scholarship and a guaranteed position in the prosecutor's office upon graduation. Her academic thesis on psychological manipulation and organized fraud operations had been published in several legal journals and was being used as training material by law enforcement agencies. At 22, she possessed expertise and insights that made her a sought-after speaker and consultant on victim advocacy issues. "You taught me that being a victim is something that happens to you, but being a survivor is a choice you make," Emma had said during her college graduation speech. "My mother showed me that the worst experiences of your life can become the foundation for the most meaningful work you'll ever do. Every family we help, every criminal we prosecute, and every victim who finds the courage to fight back represents proof that evil doesn't always win when good people refuse to give up." Marcus and I had married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family members, who understood and respected our commitment to building a relationship based on honesty, mutual support, and shared values. Our marriage was everything that my relationship with Ryan had pretended to be: authentic, supportive, and built on genuine love, rather than manipulation and deception. The contrast between the two relationships served as a constant reminder of how much I had learned about recognizing and nurturing healthy connections with other people. The life I had built in the aftermath of Ryan's betrayal was richer, more purposeful, and more authentic than anything I had experienced before the crisis that had initially seemed like it would destroy everything I valued. The woman who had discovered Amanda's resignation letter and stumbled into a web of criminal deception had evolved into someone who understood not only her own strength, but also her responsibility to use that strength to protect other people who might face similar challenges. The criminal organization that had targeted me for destruction had instead become the catalyst for my transformation into an advocate, educator, and leader, whose work had prevented countless other families from experiencing similar victimization. Ryan Martinez and his associates had spent years planning my murder and the theft of everything I had worked to build. Instead, their crimes had become the foundation for a life more meaningful and impactful than anything I could have achieved without understanding the depths of human evil and the heights of human courage. Justice had been served not only through the criminal prosecutions and civil recoveries that had resulted from our investigation, but through the systemic changes that had made it harder for similar criminal organizations to operate successfully. Every law that had been strengthened, every training program that had been implemented, and every victim who had been empowered to fight back represented a lasting victory against the criminal mentality that viewed successful women as profitable targets rather than formidable adversaries. The letter Amanda had left on my desk 7 years ago had warned me about Ryan's criminal activities and advised me to examine the financial documents in our home safe. But what Amanda could not have known was that her courage in warning me would ultimately save not just my life and Emma's future, but dozens of other families who would never experience the betrayal and victimization that had initially seemed like it would destroy us. The woman who had read that resignation letter in shock and terror had discovered reserves of strength, intelligence, and determination that she had never known existed. The criminal conspiracy that had been designed to exploit my vulnerabilities had instead revealed capabilities that had transformed not only my own life, but the lives of countless other people who benefited from the advocacy work, educational programs, and systemic improvements that had resulted from our experience. Ryan Martinez and his associates had made the mistake of targeting a woman who possessed not only the resources necessary to fight back, but also the character necessary to transform personal victory into public service. Their criminal operation had become the foundation for their own destruction, and the catalyst for changes that would protect future generations of potential victims from experiencing similar harm. The most important lesson I had learned was that strength comes not from avoiding betrayal and victimization, but from choosing to respond to those experiences with courage, determination, and commitment to justice. Every victim who found the courage to fight back, every law enforcement officer who developed expertise in investigating sophisticated crimes, and every potential victim who was protected by improved awareness and security measures represented proof that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept defeat quietly. Amanda's resignation letter had exposed the truth about my husband and saved my life. But more importantly, it had revealed the truth about myself and launched a journey that had transformed personal survival into public service and individual recovery into systemic change that would protect other families for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.